situation in the country is a very tricky one. There is no gainsaying the fact that the economy is quite in disarray in terms of the biting hardship, especially when we put into consideration the ordinary Nigerians. Of course, we are all citizens of this country and we live in this country and we see the daily happenings. We see the screaming inflation rate. You see the disorientation, especially with regards to the foreign exchange market, you know, vis-a-vis the naira, the dollar. Every day it appears the naira is just doing quick tumbling as the day goes by. And then the various interventions that the government, the central government under the leadership of President Bola Ahmed TINUBU is trying to do to cushion the effect of the economy. But still, you know, the hardship is biting. You see, if you look at the current minimum wage of workers in the country, you'll find out that it can barely get anybody past even 1 week in this country. So anybody that is a Nigerian sees these things and it calls for concern. You'll recall that during the inauguration, the president did, while he was having his inauguration speech, did mention that fuel subsidy is gone. And then it appears everything that is following as a result of the removal of subsidy is part of the crunch economic situation that we are witnessing in the country. Personally, I'm one of those that commended the president for taking the bold decision to remove the subsidy, because what I called it then was a criminal enterprise. And I did drew an analogy then, and I've said that on various fora, that the subsidy was akin to a diabetic patient who already has, you know, a gangrenous wound that was actually septic. Septic in the sense that if you don't remove that wound, then the person will eventually die. So it's not a matter of ifs and buts. There was absolutely nothing that was waiting. And then I did say that there were certain things that the government should do, especially the government at the center. And one of them is to actually try as much as possible and repose or reassure Nigerians of the confidence he had. But let me leave that at that, because that was part of the interview I had in the past. When it comes to the economic hardship, I, for one, believe that we are witnessing the fallout or effect of certain very stupid decision. I use the word stupid decision taken by the previous government. You were there when the governor of Edo State did mute out the position that the previous government was literally printing naira. Yeah. So these monies that were being printed without any regulation actually has no backing. So it's just like those days, of course, you heard of the then Uganda under Idi Amin, where the president could just walk into the central bank and order the central bank governor or whoever was in charge of the central bank to just literally print money or currency as loans. You know, under the CBN Act of 2007, I think, as amended, there was what we call the ways and means. And these were actually advances that the central bank gives to the government by means of borrowing. And with that ways and means, the government can actually, you know, cover up or show up some of its expenditure that are not circumvented by, you know, actual revenue. But then there were some provisions. And those provisions were actually there as a checkmate on certain excesses of the government of the day. And one of the provisions is that any ways and means advances must not be more than 5% of the previous year's actual revenue of the government. So if government revenue was, say, 10 trillion naira, you don't advance ways and means more than 500 billion, which is 5% of 10 trillion. But what did we see? And for you to even advance any extra one, government must make sure that the previous year's Ways and Means advance, if any was advanced, was actually duly retired or repaid back by the federal government. But we saw under the CBN, under the former governor, MFLA, advancing Ways and Means up to the extent that I think we've heard so many figures being bandied about. I think about almost, some were saying 18 trillion, some were saying over 70 trillion, without any backing. And we were definitely sure that these things were going to, the chicken was definitely going to come home to roost. So these are the issues. And then we're equally hearing now that even the previous government had mortgaged or used part of the crude oil sales, even up till, some said, up till the end of this year, to obtain some loans. So, you see, it's actually a very terrible situation. And I wish there was a way that the masses will not be caught up in this whole mess. I wish it was just the political class that we are suffering, or that are suffering from the debilitating effect of this harsh economic condition. I wish, because the problem, what pains me every day, is that the masses have been at the receiving end of government recklessness from time immemorial. And it's a very painful one. The prices of goods are skyrocketing, and they change by the second, not even by the minute. They change by the second. And then you now try to imagine a diligent civil servant who has a fixed income. How is he going to survive? A diligent lecturer who has tried as much as possible, been dedicated to his duty, and trying as much as possible to help us build the leaders of tomorrow. They can't even train their children in school, going by the current economic trend in the country. So it's a very sad one, it's a very painful one. And I really wish the president will have to do, president and his team will have to do something urgent, something drastic to get out of us, all of us out of this mess. It has been mooted in so many quarters that given the current rate or exchange rate of naira to the dollar, that the present price of petroleum is actually not sustainable. So I really we wish that the president and his economic team will actually come out clean on what the position is. Because the problem is, if actually the government is trying as much as possible to now reintroduce subsidy through the back door, then it means that the government is actually energizing that criminal enterprise. Now, I must say this, and I must be very frank with you. The subsidy regime in itself is not a terrible regime, because we must try as much as possible to draw that difference or that distinction between actually the intendment of the people that introduced the fuel subsidy. What is subsidy? It's an English word, which is what actually any government or any person, tries to pay to bridge the gap or the disparity or the difference between what actually so and so product is obtained in the market and then what you're actually selling to the final consumers. Now, for Nigerians, I said it appears the only meaningful thing previously that citizens of this Nigeria benefit from the government is the subsidy. But the problem is the criminal contraption that now, over the years, engulfed or took over the whole subsidy regime in such a way that some people have even postulated that close to 80% of what government was paying as subsidy actually could not be verified and actually ends up in the individual pocket. And so it was obvious, of course, at a point, it wasn't even enough for government to even pay from the proceeds of sale of crude oil. We saw a situation in this country where government now had to subsidize petrol from taxes it collects, even from import duties, from VAT, and from so many other revenue heads. And thus, it became clearly unsustainable. So the government had two options. One, for me, was to actually go behind and find out or mask those who have actually benefited from this criminal regime and bring them to book. And not only bring them to book, make them refund everything that this government has expended or the Nigerian government has expended in such fraudulent regime, or to cut it off entirely. Now, cut it off was definitely going to come at a very great expense to the masses and the citizens of this country. Why? Of course, you know, it is no longer news that what we have in this country is an epileptic power supply. Because I'm one of those that say, if you get, you know, the power sector in such a way that you guarantee 24 hours power supply, then I can bet you that Nigerians wouldn't even as much as require your subsidy. Because businesses, small-scale businesses and medium-scale enterprises that are actually the engine drivers of any economy will suffer. Because the cost of production, they cannot actually cope or deal with it. And so it's just like you're between the devil and the deep blue sea. But then government has to make a decision. And so it will amount to taking Nigerians for a fully ride. If the government is actually coming out to profess to us that they have removed fuel subsidy, and then we come to the realization that somehow through the back door that the government has now reintroduced subsidy.